Right, we'll start this meeting, the Inshore Sea Fisheries and Conservation meeting on the Tuesday the 8th of September. There will be some members come in late, but we can carry on with this agenda. Before we start, is it okay with members on the supplementary pack to put the revised high-level indicators into a part 2? Because there's a lot we can achieve. It's there. Are members happy to put it into a part 2?
I'm happy to go with that, to propose it if you need a proposal.
Opposed? Seconded? Carried? Thank you very much. Right, we'll start with the first agenda item, which is declarations of interest.
Sorry, Chairman. Yes, I'd like to declare I'm a hobby fisherman and I play golf with the chairman twice a week.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a commercial fisherman.
I'd like to register an interest that my son is also a commercial fisherman at the moment. So that declaration of interest done. Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting to confirm that there are a true record held on the 11th of June. Is everyone happy they're a correct record? Proposed? Seconded? Right. You were second that they were a correct record?
Yes.
Right. Those in favour? Thank you very much. Urgent items, I haven't got any. Budget monitoring is in the pack, and I'll hand you over to Diana.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm doing budget monitoring today for Ben Barrett. We've got our end of audit coming up, so he's busy preparing that at the moment, but he sends his apologies. There are two main issues within the budget that will be of interest to members. What looks like an overspend, but is actually just miscoding of the lobster tagging project. So this will come back out of this budget, go into the lobster tagging project, and has already been claimed for. So that's just a miscoding error. And the saving made from the Chief Fisheries Officer going part-time, which we'll need to, when we look at our revised budget at the next meeting, we'll have to decide how we intend to use that underspend.
Are there any questions? No. We're going to propose that that's all okay. Proposed. Seconder? Those in favour? Wonderful. Thank you very much. Would you like to declare an interest?
Yes.
Do you want to jump over Doug's report until he comes in?
Yeah.
On to the revised induction paper.
We seem to be flying through this meeting so far, Nick, so the only thing to bring you up to speed is that the supplementary pack, we moved into a part 2 for information. Okay? As Doug isn't here, we'll come back to him when he arrives, because he did say he'd be late. Number 6, the revised induction paper for the new IFCA members. I'll hand you over to Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. This is obviously an update from the last meeting when I was asked to bring it back with an amended version. I've added a few omissions which I left off on the original one, which went to members in, when was it? June, I think, last meeting. So this is almost the final one, apart from a couple of typos, which you've probably picked up if you've read it, only minor ones. On page 21, I don't think we actually made a link with the lobster hatchery in year 201. It should be 2001. And in 6.3, if you delete the before MCZ, because it doesn't make sense, that sentence. But apart from those small typos, I think that's pretty much, at the moment anyway, the definitive version. Although, of course, bear in mind that the induction paper is not a document in concrete. It can be changed or amended when circumstances change. Thank you, Chairman.
Are members happy to approve the induction paper? Yeah? All in favour? Lovely. Thank you. Yeah, we can do that as well. Yeah. I'm going to leave 7 out until Sangeeta comes, even though Steve will be taking it. We'll move on to 8, the future IFCA funding working party update. I'll hand you over to Steve for that.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. A couple of interesting things here in that it's quite unlikely that we'll be receiving any solid information from DEFRA regarding funding until fairly late in this financial year. The Comprehensive Spending Review will not be published now until November. It brings all local authorities involved in IFCAs at a disadvantage because clearly we need to do budgets in advance. But that's the way of the world, unfortunately. So we're not likely to know anything solid. However, there are a couple of reasons why we should be optimistic. I don't really want to say a great deal more than this, except that DEFRA regard IFCAs as their favoured partners in the whole project in order to get marine protected areas up to standard for European Commission. So we are regarded quite highly in DEFRA, but of course we are, as I said, unfortunately in the hands of the Treasury, and no one can forecast what cuts are going to make and where those cuts will fall. We already know that DEFRA are going to take quite a big hit, but how within DEFRA's family that it's apportioned, we've got no idea at the moment. So what I've intended to do, as it said in 2.4 in that report, I think it would be wise to consider various scenarios based on assumption of cuts, and of course no cut at all, of different proportions. And what I'll do in 2.5, I will draw up a list of the statutory duties and responsibilities. They're all in Part 6. I did mention this at the informal IFCA meeting we had 2 weeks ago, that I would do this. I do it in 2 columns. One side, on the left-hand side, I'll do all the statutory requirements we have to do, such as enforcement work, such as monitoring of conservation areas and so on and so forth, which we're obliged to do legally under Part 6 of the Marine and Coastal Access Act. And then on the right-hand side, put the budget required to fulfill those requirements. And then, once I've done that, then we call a working party, future IFCA funding working party, and look at that. Unfortunately, it'd probably still be before we get any indication from DEFRA as to what the level of funding will be, but at least we will be prepared. We'll have something ready to go forward in April 2016.
Are there any questions on that? No? Opposed and seconded on it? That's all started. Yeah, thank you for that. Right. We can do the joint working between the IFCAs and the MMO, I believe. Should we go for that? No?
Yes, Chairman. Joint working. I think Colin might well come into this as well at some time, but certainly since the last meeting, you'll see the 2 attachments. One was a letter which went to the head of the Fisheries Department in DEFRA, Professor Sam Evans, who the Chairman and I met before. And the following paper was drawn up by the chief officers at a meeting in York in early June as to how some of these ideas that came out of the joint work programme could be put together. It's an interesting scenario, and I remember Diana saying in a previous meeting, we shouldn't look at this as a challenge, but as an opportunity. And I think that's the theme that's been taken up by all the chief officers of the other IFCAs. They looked at it as a possible way of proper working, really, between the 2 agencies. What is interesting, however, in this is that we've tried to, the officer group, the COG as it's called, COG, has tried to widen the net a bit and say to the government, look, why not, instead of just looking at the MMO and DEFRA, and IFCA rather, you've got to include other agencies as well. And they name here the Strategic Defence and Security Review. So, I mean, the maritime security part of that should also be included in. So this is really one of the first steps to say that the IFCAs are ready and prepared to look at joint working operations and joint working programme. It's a fairly ambitious programme, so what we tried to do in the matrix, it's Appendix 2 in this, is to draw up the action that could be taken fairly quickly, the timescale about cash savings and so on and so forth, and how it may be, how it may be part of the bigger picture. I will say, however, and I mentioned this at the last one, that we already have a really good relationship with the MMO, and joint working is something we've done for years, and it won't make a huge difference here. I have got a telephone meeting with Nick Wright, who is the Southwestern, the area manager for the MMO, week starting the 14th of September. He wants to talk to all the chief officers for all the IFCAs around the country, and I've arranged to have a telephone meeting with him week starting 14th of September to consider various options and opportunities. I've been through his email very carefully, and from what I've seen, the relevant bits as far as Scilly are concerned, we already do in any case. So it won't be a case of any radical change. It'll just be a case of reinforcing what we already do. I don't know whether Colin wants to come in.
Just to supplement that, I spoke to Nick Wright on Friday, and he is content that across England, the Scillies, Cornwall and certainly Devon and Severn have the right mix, the right level of engagement, the right contact levels, and also the right output. So, as you said, and to iterate your point, we do as many of the things that we can possible. There is no extra funding, as you're aware, which you alluded to in your budget statement, and the comprehensive spending review in November will be certainly interesting. I'll leave that word hanging there. But I'm keen to do whatever is required on our quarterly visits. I don't think there's enough money in the budget to increase that number of visits to you, but certainly whilst we're here, we're maximising our time on the ground, both looking at marine licensing and ashore looking at official vessel licensing and how we undertake routine inspections. And I'm proud to say we've achieved that today.
Yeah, thank you. I think an example of joint working in other areas might be, in fact, it's highlighted in here about sharing office space. It was a little bit difficult when you're on the mainland and we're over here. So, I mean, quite a few of the things in their paper are not really relevant to us.
Okay, so we've heard all that, and the recommendation is that members consider the opportunities for the developing joint working. We've got a proposer and a seconder for that? Yeah. All in favour? Thank you very much.
It is ongoing anyway.
Right, that's...
You want to jump back to 5?
Which way are you going?
Good evening, Sangeeta. How are you, all right? Right, no problem at all. I'd like to welcome Joanna Smith, new Natural England lady. Pleased to meet you. Welcome to the meeting. It's a short meeting tonight. We've gone through a fair old bit. Just to bring you up to speed, the supplementary pack, we've moved to a part 2. We've done declarations of interest, budget monitoring. We've gone back to 5, 7, and then we'll carry on with 10. So if we go to agenda item 5 now, Doug C. Fishery Coxon's report. Please.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. Okay, I'll just start off, sorry. So during the last quarter, we went over to Cornwall to do a joint training workshop. So that encompasses ourselves, Cornwall IFCA, Severn and Devon IFCA. It was the training of our new drop-down cameras that DEFRA purchased for us. It's all about, it was the setup, how to deploy, how to record, how the software worked. These are quite expensive cameras, they're 65 grand each. So there is protocols on using them and how not to use them. So we did that. Going on to inspections. So in the last quarter, we've been able to do quite a few boardings as well. We've noticed that there's been a couple of Newland fishermen near our district. We've been monitoring them. We have gone out to see if we can board them, but every time we approach them, they are not inside our district. So, but they have. We are still showing a presence there. So we've been quite good, been quite welcoming on the. Every time we come on board, commercial fishermen are aware of our duties, so that they have no problems with us being there. Sorry, just moving on. Okay, yeah, going on to the unmarked gear. So I know this is a bit of an old issue, but we have been noticing still there's a high level of unmarked gear still around the island. There was, in one instance, an unmarked buoy in around the Eastern Isles. We tried to haul that to see what it was, and we were unable to do that with our electric hauler on the rib. So that indicates to us whatever it is of some weight. So that's not gonna be a hobby fisherman hauling that by hand. It could be a hobby fisherman, but they'd have to have a hydraulic hauler, which one or two of them does or do have. But and I believe, speaking to Tim, you believe that they're quite the big coffin sort of pots, so which I'm not aware of any hobby guys having. So
Can I just ask, what's the percentage of unmarked gear? It would be useful to know quantum.
I can go back through what we.
Roughly, is it 20%?
Could I just come in on that? That would be very difficult because assuming they're hobby, there might be one pot. If I had an unmarked string, it would have 15 pots on it. So percentages would be impossible, really. But because they're single pots, there's huge numbers of crappy buoy ropes with no markings on.
Yeah, and they're also becoming a navigational hazard as well if they're not using them correctly. I'm not saying that they're maliciously doing it, but if they're using too much floating line, they can be a navigational hazard for other boat operators, especially say like yachtsmen's coming in at night. So yeah, just want to touch base on looking at the committee agreeing to looking at introducing a hobby fish marking bylaw. The other reason is we can't tell if they are commercial or they are hobby. If they're unmarked, it can be anybody's. And like Nick said, we don't know what's on the bottom. It's all like could have about 15 pots on the bottom if it was a commercial guy, or it could have one pot. So we really don't know. But if we have a bylaw in place, then we could link that to them telling us how much gear they're working. Moving on to the HRA, we've finished the surveys for Tim. What I was going to show you is just sort of footages that we were able to get. Sorry, that's really out of focus. So this is our array. So there's a couple of different types of underwater cameras. You got your drop down camera, you got your sledge, and you got the array. The array doesn't actually touch the seabed. It doesn't drag along like a sledge, so it's got less impact. but it depends on what sort of ground you're trying to survey, depending on what sort of camera setup you're going to use. Picking one at random. So when you deploy, sorry. There we go. Here's something interesting. So on this, we're able to see at the top left-hand side, we've got P, which is pressure, so that's in bar pressure. You've got T, which is the temperature of the water at the unit, and you've got the salinity as well as it's given us GPS overlay, so we're able to tell. On that, you'll also see there's like green lines. It's quite hard to see actually on this one, but you can sort of see there's another one there. So that's also given us a scale that we can work off, so we can see what sort of objects or targets that we're looking at. So this is what we've been able to, this is in 40 bar pressure, so I believe that's about 30 metres.
No, it's 30 metres is 4 bar.
Oh, so what's 40?
5 bar. So I think that's metres. I think that 38.27 is probably metres.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I'd guess. Because
Okay.
that can't be 38 bar because you're in about 400 foot of water there.
Oh, okay, then. Yeah, so and that's metres. So the first couple of ones that we did, we were like, had to fine tune, go back through and do some more surveys. This has actually been passed on to Tim. I just need to give you the software that gives you the overlay information. So just thought you guys might like to see what sort of footage we were able to achieve. Okay, going on to the spiny lobsters. As you know, they are not as abundant as they once were in the UK. They are a sub-feature of our MCZs, and with our tagging project, we've been able to highlight a few flagged up areas. We know that there's more males in the district than females. We know that there a female European lobster in the planktonic stage before it settles to the seabed is about 2 to 3 weeks. And we know that the spiny lobsters are around 10 to 12 months. So there is a longer planktonic stage, which is obviously takes repopulating or populating a lot longer. And that coupled with that there is not as many females in the district, I'm proposing for the committee to look at introducing a ban on landing buried crawfish. I've spoken to a few fishermen, some fishermen today, for example, Tim, who nets and targets them, he suggested even closing the fishery down for 5 years. So that's his income there, and he was saying that to the MMO guys. So there are recognitions that some things need to be done. I'm not proposing to do something as drastic as closing the fishery down for 5 years, but at least taking a step in a direction of banning buried. And at this stage, our percentages of what we are getting buried aren't that high, and the percentages of, I think out of all our buried, only 2 have been thrown back. The rest have all been landed. So it gives you a bit of an indication on our population. So, moving on to that, we've been doing some side scanning for an energy company looking at renewable energy using wave energy. Side scanning some proposed sites for them to help them out. And I believe they're coming back this month, so we'll be sitting down with them, going through some data of what they, of the areas that we've done for them. Moving forth, our spiny lobster behavioural study, we haven't completed that yet. We're still in the middle of that. We have done, so where we're up to, we've done spiny lobsters, seeing what their behaviour is with European lobsters. and we've done a competition for shelter. So one shelter to one animal each. We had 6 males, 6 females of crawfish, 6 males, 6 females of European lobsters. We were able to do replicates of those. It did take us some time. We had the help of the hatchery set it up. We had to use blackout blinds, stuff like that, because they are most active at night. What we are finding is that the European lobster does dominate the shelter. Well, that's not a problem. But what we would also like to do is run for food. Who gets to the food, who takes priority, who muscles out the other one. So we're about halfway through that. So in our next IFCA meeting, I will bring to you a full report on that. Moving on to the spiny lobster, juvenile grounds. This stage, we've been deploying shrimp nets. Unfortunately, we've managed to lose half of them during some bad weather. Barry Bennett was able to recover some of ours. Ours got mixed up with his, got entwined. So we were able to retrieve some of them. But at the moment, we actually haven't been able to find too much in the way of juveniles. So nothing to report back on that, but we're going to go back to the drawing board there. We have someone that was speaking to us at the moment to see if we can fine-tune that and go back out and see if we can gather more data and information. CFAS has contacted us as well to help them support in their shark and ray study. This is a national thing, and they'd like to know about just around sillies, so we said we're more than happy to support them with that. As you're probably aware, Prince Charles and the Duchess, or Camilla, also attended the islands on a royal visit. The IFCA was asked to put on a little bit of a showcase with our touch tank, which was it got good recognition, I would say. Prince Charles was very interested in it and engaged quite well. Both parties did engage quite well into our tagging project on what we could explain to them. Moving on, National Lobster Hatchery has been over. It was over in August. We've done a juvenile released 1,500 juvenile lobsters, and we did that at the back of St. Martin's. We also released 8-month-old lobsters as well, a part of a study they're doing with CFAS in aquaculture. So they're a lot bigger, more developed. So we were able to release some of those as well, which was quite good. The marine biology, we've had Dr. Stephen Cotterill over from the MBA. He spent a couple of days here with, and we were able to deploy the DST tags on 16 animals across the islands, which is quite useful. And the data we get back from if we're able to retrieve any of the data back, we're going to be sending it to Stephen, and they're more than happy to process and analyse that data for us free of charge. So they're quite interested in seeing movements of spiny lobsters as well. If you have a look at the photo on 2.2, 2.20, it is of a female that had just been mated. You can see if you have a look at the back legs, if you go in, it's almost like a white gel. So we were able to put a DST tag on her as well and release her. So hopefully she becomes buried and we're able to retrieve that information she's recaught, and we're able to download that data. So MMO have agreed to our project changes on the tagging front. So a European lobster, if caught, just the streamer tag is £5, and a spiny lobster streamer tag is £25, and one with a DST is £50 per animal. So, but there's only 16 of those tags. Going on, Natural England have also contributed £10,000 to help keep the project even more robust, and from that we're being able to purchase £4,000 worth of spiny lobsters, oversized animals, to be released to try and get those numbers of tags up on the ground, to try and tag the juveniles. There isn't as many juveniles as European lobsters, so we're able to try and get more tags on the ground by that funding. And that brings us to the end.
Right, well, as members will note, there are 3 recommendations. We'll take one first. Are there any questions to the Rib Coxon?
The Natural England funding for the purchasing the spiny lobsters, how many do you reckon to buy, and how far on are you?
On the crawfish, we have spent, today we came to the end of that 4,000. What we did is we agreed, for fairness of everyone, we brought it at market price. So there's some we purchased at £17 a kilo and some at 27. So it was agreed on with the fishermen on the day of purchase. But I would say roughly...
We're in about 70 today, I would have thought. 60 to 70 today, and previous to that we've probably put in 50.
So over 100, so hopefully nearer to 150. Yeah.
Any other questions? No? We'll move on to 2 then, that members agree to the future course of action regarding the gear marketing bylaw. Have we got a proposer and a seconder for that, or any questions on it?
What's it going to cost, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, actually, could I just come in there, because that is the bylaw making flowchart that DEFRA publish. Apart from the man hours, which are quite considerable in making a bylaw, it will take probably 2 years to get passed. So it's not a quick and easy process. You've got to identify the issue to start with, then define the management objectives, consider other options, such as what is in place now, such as voluntary code of practice, and then gather evidence from stakeholders and prepare an impact assessment and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of man hours involved in making a bylaw. The hard cost of the advertisements has actually come down. I've worked it out today, strangely enough. It's about £1,200 for the advertising over 2 weeks in 3 publications, 2 national ones, and one national one, which is Fishing News, and 2 local ones, Cornishman and the Western Morning News. And the total for that over 2 weeks is about £1,200. So the main cost, of course, is the time it takes, the man hours, to put a bylaw together. And of course, it's not straightforward. Once you do the impact assessment, you've got to get legal advice, send it off to interested parties such as Natural England, such as not the Environment Agency because they're not involved here, such as DEFRA, the MMO, and then if it comes back after that, you can go ahead and the committee then, the IFCA, will then make the bylaw, and then there's further consultation to go on after that, and then it finally gets sent to the MMO for quality assurance and confirmation, and then it goes to the Secretary of State before he signs it. And as I said at the beginning, it is a 2-year process. Each bylaw takes about 2 years. DEFRA are not, they're already asking for bylaws to be made as quickly as possible regarding the habitats regulation assessment for the marine protected areas, because they realise that within the next 18 months they're going to be overlogged with prospective bylaws. So they are a bit concerned about that. But yeah, so that's a process. Takes about 2 years, a lot of man hours, and the cost is about £1,200.
Mr. Chairman, we've been round the world and back, as you know, with hobby fishermen, marking gear and all the rest of it. I think we need to turn the thing on its head now and actually decide what it is we're trying to achieve. So I don't think we should go ahead with that at this present time. I think we'll have to go back and actually discuss and decide, you know, is it unmarked gear because it's a navigational hazard? Is it overfishing from hobby fishermen? You know, I say we've tried to deal with this without having a bylaw in the past through voluntary practice by having the fisheries officer go around, check people as they come ashore and various other methods, and it's all basically failed. So I think we need to decide what it is we're trying to achieve from this and then decide how we're going to move forward with it.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. What's interesting about what Robert said, I did put together, I think it was about 2 years ago, a composite bylaw, which was a pot limitation bylaw that included restrictions on hobby fishermen. I don't know whether want me to go visit that again and produce a couple of draft bylaws for consideration at the next meeting.
Sangeeta. Well.
Thank you. I was just going to comment on a couple of things that just came to mind. One was, as Robert was saying, from previous meetings when I was on the IFCA, there were, you know, those discussions going on, and in terms of cost of a bylaw, perhaps having some of those things that have been talked about and discussed in terms of hobby fishermen over the last sort of 3 years, all coming together in one rather than separate ones, would obviously be more cost effective in terms of time. But in order to do that, it would need, as Robert says, what is the reasoning for it? And just something else that came into my head, just from the conversation we had in our meeting this afternoon, we were talking about, and I know it's an agenda item that you'll come on to, about the habitats regulation assessment, the change of approach for managing fisheries in European marine sites. And I know we had a lengthy conversation about it on the phone maybe a month or so ago. So Steve has to, on behalf of the IFCA, carry out an HRA for potting. And when we were talking about effort, because I've gone through the same process with Cornwall IFCA, we've done Lizard and also Land's End and Cape Bank. And they've got a permit scheme, so they know what's happening in terms of commercial fishermen. But I mean, forgive me if I'm wrong and correct me if I misunderstand, but if you don't know, if the gear's unmarked, how do you know how many pots are down there, whether it's 1 or 2 for a hobby fisherman or a string that's not marked, that maybe, I don't know if all commercial fishermen mark them and it may just be an error that one hasn't. But in terms of trying to complete the habitats regulations assessment, and I know you're coming onto that agenda item, in order to demonstrate the outcome which we hope it will have, that there will be no adverse effect on the site. I'm not trying to prejudge it, but from the discussions we've had today, it's just the evidence to say that the IFCA are able to have a handle on what that effort is, because otherwise, I don't know, maybe you know through other ways, but it was just one of the aspects that came into my head why that would be useful in terms of managing the site. But I totally agree that having more than one aspect in a bylaw is obviously going to be cost effective, and also try and pull together the discussions that you've obviously been having with the hobby fishermen over the last, 5 years, more? 25 years?
Chairman, thank you. The other IFCAs deal with this in different ways, and Northumberland is probably the most proactive in this, in that they have a system of yellow tags and white tags. For yellow for commercial fishermen, white tags for hobby fishermen. And hobby fishermen have to get a permit, and then they're issued with, I think it's up to 10 tags. So the voluntary agreement at the moment is that they may use up to 10 pots. And that's the way it's done. So immediately when the fisheries officer in that area comes across pots, if they're tagged either yellow or red, then yellow or white rather, then he knows it's either commercial or hobby. And the hobby fishermen have to get a permit first. So I mean, there are it's not a straightforward bylaw of saying, you know, there are other aspects such as issuing a permit. You mentioned Cornwall. Cornwall, can they issue permits, in fact, for hobby fishermen and for commercial fishermen? So the data that they get from their fishing industry is a lot easier to obtain. So it would make it a lot easier in the future for getting information. But I mean, I only said about the way that other IFCAs do it as an example. I mean, they're not alone. Sussex do a tagging system as well for hobby fishermen and for commercial.
Tim?
I kind of get where everyone's coming from here, because it's very hard for Doug to police it, and we all know that there probably are one or two that may be commercial without marking pots particularly well, and it's hard to say that it's definitely so. However, I did a little bit of a swim round at Penninnis that's got a sort of like the local minefield of pots there. And there wasn't hardly anyone there that had more than one or two pots. They were all the old type of pots mainly. They were very little in them anyway. So environmentally, they're nearly all in the shallows. They're nearly all on the kelp and boulders in the shallows, so they're not doing any harm to the seabed. And I doubt if they're catching an awful lot, but maybe that's not the point. But it's obviously an issue that's going to go round and round, and somehow we're going to end up. But I was quite interested to hear what Sangeeta said, what other areas, and what Steve said, what other areas do.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to ask, is there a template for a bylaw from another area, in effect, to save some of the work? And also, while we're discussing this, if the next point we're talking about a bylaw for spiny lobsters, if we agree that, can it not all work in together?
Yeah, composite bylaws, as long, for instance, the fishing gear permit bylaw, which we passed last year, is a composite bylaw in that it restricts the size of vessels. It also restricts areas where bottom trawling can take place. So that's a good example of a composite bylaw, but they're sort of interconnected. I think tagging, or rather the prohibition of landing buried spiny lobsters or buried crawfish and hobby fishermen, they're not really connected in that sense. I mean, the spiny lobster one is a very simple bylaw. We can do that more or less in a couple of hours, put that together, and the impact assessment as well, straightforward. And that is a very common one in many IFCAs, that one. The other one is a bit more complex. The gear marking bylaw is more complex, and there are lots of variations on different aspects of it that need to be considered before we even consider going to consultation.
Diana.
Can I make a suggestion that we have a paper to the next IFCA which sets out all the options that there might possibly be for a bylaw, look at good practice from other places, so that at the next IFCA meeting we can look at the options and we can say this might or might not be acceptable and wouldn't work here based on local knowledge and expertise, and then we can move it forward possibly with a bylaw working group or some such thing that would drive forward the bylaw. Like Sangeeta, I've sat at this table for I think a year and a half, and pretty much every meeting it's been a tale of we have got lots of unmarked gear and we're not sure if they're commercial or hobby. And I don't, to a certain extent, it doesn't matter whether they aren't catching very much. What our concern is the fact that we've had a voluntary code in place that people should have signed up to, really, and they've not been. So if you, it's a bit like school rules, isn't it? You have a voluntary code, and if they don't play the game, you move on to a more sort of heavy-handed approach.
What's the feeling between members on Diana's proposal?
Yeah.
I think it's the only way to move forward at this stage.
Yeah.
So proposed, seconded. Those in favour for the next meeting that we have a paper? Right. Lovely. What about the spiny number 3? Steve said that could go through pretty quick.
Yes, Chairman, that one is very straightforward. Funnily enough, while you've been talking, I was listening, Diana, by the way, but I was checking out the Sussex Sussex IFCA's shellfish permit bylaw, and what Nick said is actually in there, strangely enough. So Sussex have actually got a shellfish permit bylaw, which includes commercial and recreational permits, and also a banning on buried hens.
Mr. Chairman, I think with respect to the other fishermen in the islands, Tim is retiring age. There's 1 or 2 young fishermen here who have to earn a living, and they at least ought to be consulted, even if the IFCA decides that this is the way to go. I believe that the fishermen should be consulted about this so that they can come up with a plan. They've already, as you know, tripped over themselves to be helpful and with a whole load of measures. I just feel that before we go down that path, we should take the opportunity to consult with them.
Sorry, one of the flowchart is consultation. So surely, if you get the ball rolling, that will cover that and consultation going out to the general public, so that those fishermen with any concerns can come forward and voice those concerns or questions or opinions.
Yes, Chairman, it is actually the 4th part of the bylaw making flowchart, which is quite long. Gather evidence from stakeholders and all interested parties, including fishermen.
What's your view, Robert?
Well, yeah, but I you know, when you have a discussion with fishermen, there are other things that come out. I mean, for example, even going back to the European lobster, you know, there's discussion about actually limiting the size of large lobsters as well, and somebody might come up with a different scheme that's helpful with crawfish. And if you go, you know, I mean, it's up to the IFCA to decide, but I would have thought it would just be common sense to consult with the fishermen before you go down the road, because you don't want to start getting them wound up and so on before, you know, if you ask them first, then you might find there's a lot more cooperation.
Tim.
I was just going to say that we've had our success with MCZs and such as by working together rather than appearing as though we're already wielding the big stick beforehand, and I would support Robert in that the way forward is to go and have a fishermen's meeting in the next few months and let them come up with some ideas, because otherwise it will look as though it's already a done deal, and that they'll come there with anger rather than...
I endorse your comments, but Zangita.
Yeah, I was just going to say that from my experience on working in Scilly through Finding Sanctuary, that's been the key to the success here, that the community were involved and the community was supporting it. And with any bylaw, for people to be able to understand and to make enforcement easier, it's when you bring people along with you, whether that's in marine protected areas or with a bylaw for buried crawfish. I would be really interested, though, to find out if anyone comes up with any reason why they would suggest not doing it, because I just, biologically, to take out females that have progeny just doesn't make any sense to me. So I for one would be really interested if anyone's got any reasons why they felt that it would benefit the longevity and the future of the fishery for crawfish in Scilly by catching buried hens. Are they called hens?
Yeah.
But it may be, for example, that the fishermen suggest and agree that all buried hens are tagged.
Yeah.
You know, and if they're underneath this project, at least there's £4,000 being spent you know, so the fishermen could sell them, the fish is still going back into the sea. You know, it's only a suggestion, but it just may be that,
Make it more
that,
palatable.
that,
in
you know,
terms
they
of the-
come up with ideas like that.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I thought you were suggesting that they would perhaps come up with a reason not to do it.
I think they will. Right. I'm just saying, I'm in favour of but I don't think the fishermen will be.
The percentages of fishermen actually catching crawfish is not as high as what people think.
Just to clarify, of that £4,000 that we have been spending, we have been targeting females predominantly because there is such a bias towards the males. But also the data that we've collected shows that there really isn't a great deal of buried females being landed or even caught. So, I mean, it might be the case that that percentage of the catch that they might potentially be banned from removing is really small.
That's because they haven't got berries yet. In a month's time, there'll be more. Crawfish are much more season. Lobsters are all through the year. Crawfish have a season for
Yeah.
berries.
Well, we can look at it at the end of the year and see what the data says, and we can put that to them.
Right, what we'll do, we'll nip this one in the bud then. We'll hold on to 2 and 3 till the next meeting, and hopefully you can have a fisherman's meeting, and then we can decide definitely what we're going to do on these 2 at the next meeting. Are you happy with that, yeah? All members happy with that? Right, wonderful. We'll move on then. We'll move on now to 7, and I'll hand you over to the Chief Fisheries Officer. Potting and netting habitats regulations. We didn't do that, did we? Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
England, that was...
Yes, that's right. Yeah, we did. We were going to do this, and then a guest turned up. Right. Yeah, where I am with this, as you know, because it's part of the revised approach by DEFRA, as mentioned in 1.1, that I have to do HRAs, or the IFCA has to do a habitats regulation assessment on fishing activities. Now, I've well underway with the one on potting, the fishing activity on potting. I've started the netting one as well. I did originally think I could put them both together, but Sangeeta told me no, they've got to be separate, because they are, in fact, separate activities. So it's not a huge burden, because one is almost the same as the other anyway, but I've got to do 2 separate habitats regulation assessments on those. The outcomes are mentioned all the way down from 2.1, 2.2. I mentioned the red activities, which have already been covered by the fishing gear permit bylaw, so they're out of the way. These are known as amber activities, at the top of page 24. We are required to take appropriate management action. And in 2.5, I mentioned about the HRA. What I've done so far, and I did this a couple of months ago, is to go through DEFRA's draft paper, which apparently has been updated. I haven't actually seen the updated version yet. Evidence for management of potting impacts on designated features. And they came to the initial conclusion, and quite interesting here, the final two lines in that. Potting has limited impacts which have frequently been found to be undetectable against natural variability and disturbance. In other words, pretty much what Tim Alsop has mentioned in the past, that most of the disturbance with the marine environment is caused through storms and natural variability rather than potting. However, it still has to be done. The draft evidence review couldn't find any great significant impact on habitats or species from potting, but there are some cautions in there, in that the studies have some limitations. I go on to 2.8 to explain a bit about that, and so on and so forth. So what I've done is probably done about 3/4 of the HRA on potting, and I've just started the netting HRA. Should be fairly easy. There's no drift netting, for instance, in Scilly, and very little commercial netting compared to the fishing in general. So the HRAs have to be completed before the end of 2016. which I think you all know anyway. I'm hoping to get the vast bulk of these done before the end of this financial year, which is March next year. So hopefully I should have broken the back of it by then. But I had a meeting with Sangeeta and Joanna this afternoon, and they gave me a lot of advice and technical help on some paragraphs which I was stuck on. So hopefully it can move on fairly quickly. And I think Tim might have something else to say on. I did mention in the report that you may be showing some of the evidence that you've been gathering. The main part of it, incidentally, it's not just a question of saying what we'd like. It has to be evidence-based. I think it's a phrase that Robert's used before in the past. Any decision we make must be based on hard evidence. There is a get-out in a way in that you could apply what's called a precautionary principle, which is, I've always regarded that as a bit of a get-out clause. In other words, you're not sure if it's happening, but if it will happen, then we better put something in place to cover it. So it is a bit flexible as well. But as I say, Tim is working. I've got 10 sites so far, and I think Tim's got a lot more which he's done, and Doug's been doing some underwater video as well on site, gathering evidence of what needs to be protected, what is protected, and what the differences are between fished and non-fished reefs. So, Tim, I don't know whether you want to come in.
Yeah, sure. I've actually done 14 videos now, and I'll show you the geographical spread in a moment. All the videos are 10 metres. All of them have random stills done, much the same as the Natural England 6-year condition survey. And I have got a full species list done with the thanks of Sarah Dashfield from Plymouth Marine Laboratories, who's very kindly done us a full species list on all of them. And this also comes with pitons in the rock with markers on them, GPS and instructions, sort of like blow-by-blow instruction of depth and which way to run the line, and they're all simple compass directions. And the video, I'll just show you a couple of excerpts of. This one was at Peter's Rock, which is near the Hard Lewis at St Martin's, and as you can see, you can freeze that wherever. You can identify nearly everything from the video, and it's about. We video both sides of the line, so you're getting at least 3-4 meters strip on every one. Some of them I've used a wider angle lens if the viz will allow than others, and sort of to get an idea of the general quality. And if I move to a sponge site and give you an idea of how that one's generally gone. Whilst you're watching that, I had a chat with Rob when he was here, and we've made sure that the habitats are split down, and in our own quirky way, the habitats don't quite fit the usual the usual sort of criteria. So I've tried to make sure that I've picked habitats like this, one in a tidal channel. We've got 3 fragile sponge anthrozoan, 2 mixed sites, which sillies are quite famous for, where there's anemones and sponges. I've got 3 swell sites, which are mainly fed by the swells in the Atlantic and have many hydroids, certainly oakum pipe hydroids and so forth. 3 high energy sites, which we got a lot of. Some medium energy sites with fragile sponge and sunset corals. I've got 3 of those sites as well. So apart from the shallows, which the kelp sites are not being damaged, we've covered a lot of the habitat. And as you can see, this one was done with a fisheye lens, hence the bending of the line. Unfortunately, the line was straight, but the fisheye lens does tend to bend things. But you get an incredible spread of.
They've gone out and spoken to all the netters, and now they're talking about a bylaw, perhaps, but they're going to obviously consult with it, where if though, and there's something similar in St Ives Bay. So if there's a trigger figure in St Ives Bay, so if there's 100 seabirds, any seabirds caught in one incident, then the fishery is closed for a set number of days, and the idea being that those are the sea conditions, wind conditions, all those coming together, if you like, the perfect storm, that would mean that that incident is likely to happen. It might be once every 10 years, it might be once every 20 years, and they're looking at the moment to do something similar, and it may be, you know, another 15, 20 years before something of that magnitude comes. So if there is something that is a significant issue that occurs due to netting, then those are the examples around the country
Are the
of
fishermen...
how the IFCAs have dealt with them,
I was going
or are
to say,
dealing with them.
for that trigger, are the fishermen actually reporting what that, or is that coming from...
In St Ives Bay, you can't not, if there are 100 seabirds caught in fishing nets, people you would know.
Everyone can see.
Everyone can see.
Where, like, if you're out at the Bishop or the Western Rocks or Norwood Rocks or elsewhere, it's kind of hard to...
Yeah, and that...
I think this, you can have a chat with Sangadir at a later date on this one, Doug. Nick.
Can I do 2 or 3 points? Birds in nets, that's basically bass fishing, which we don't do here. There are no bass. So the netting we're doing here is gill nets in sort of 20 fathom of water. We don't catch birds, end of story. So I'm not saying there isn't the occasional one caught around the islands in a mullet net or something, but it's unusual. We certainly don't catch a concentration of birds because we aren't fishing in the same places they are. As regards interaction with seals, I'd like to have a bit more interaction with seals, preferably with a rifle. But we have a voluntary agreement not to cull seals. We have a hugely thriving population of seals. If the odd one gets in a net, tough. Don't raise that one. You'll undo any good you've ever done with fishermen so far. You know, our seal population is huge. Seals and nets around the islands with mullet nets, you can't hurt them because they'll go in the net, they'll come out again, they choose to interact with nets because they follow. I've actually had instances of a seal following me for a quarter of a mile, wait till I've shot my net, and he'll go along it and pick the fish out of it. So we aren't hurting seals with nets as much as I'd like to. Yeah, so birds isn't a problem, and seals is not a problem.
Thank you for your comments, Nick. Right, what we'll do now is we shall move on to 10, Natural England, and I'd like to welcome Joanna Smith. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you.
No problem.
I'm just going to open the right page. Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just thought I'd just give a brief introduction to myself because most of you don't know me. So my name is Joanna Smith. I've been working with Natural England for about 3.5 years in the Devon, Cornwall and Isles of Scilly team. My main area of work so far has been focusing in Lyme Bay and Tor Bay, so quite a lot of fisheries work there. I've been deputy representative on the Devon and Severn IFCA for the last few years, supporting Andrew Knights. And I've also recently taken on looking at Tor Bay MCZ, because that's a new site that's come on. Before that, I worked with Finding Sanctuary for a few years, and that's when I got to come over here and met Steve at that point, and 1 or 2 fishermen, and I think we went to a pub from memory. But so yeah, I've been lucky enough to be here before. I just wanted to say as well that I only work 3 days a week, so and I have a kind of already a full schedule, but obviously when Rob left, we were a little bit stuck within the team, and they have replaced Rob with somebody who doesn't really have fisheries experience, so they asked me if I would come on board to help until Kate comes back from maternity leave. So I won't be able to cover all Isles of Scilly work because I can't fit it in, but I agreed to do this part of the role, so I'll be coming to the committee meetings until she's back. There are various other people in the team who are covering the different projects that are being run at the moment in the Isles of Scilly, so we're kind of just muddling through for the next few months. So bear with us if I don't know, bear with me if I don't know everything. Okay, what else? Was there anything else I was going to mention?
obvious? No. Okay, I'll just run through a couple of key points that I just wanted to pull out from the report. There was the Isles of Scilly Special Area of Conservation Monitoring, which was the CFAS project. I just followed up on this before the meeting, and we've now received the final report. I haven't looked through it yet, but I have said I'll send it on to Steve. I don't know if it's been published yet, but I'll send it on to Steve anyway, so he has it to inform the HRA. Hasn't been published yet. The only other thing I really wanted to pull out was, just to mention as well that one of the areas that I've been focusing on is the Conservation Advice Project, so I'm leading on that for our team. As you probably know, the Conservation Advice for the Isles of Scilly is going to be rewritten, but we're not planning on doing that until, well, it won't be finished until 2017 in terms of the consultation period. But in the meantime, generic conservation advice has been provided to the IFCA to help with the revised approach and the HRAs, so hopefully that's been useful. And I think that was all I was going to say, unless anyone had any questions on anything else in the report.
Any questions? No? Well, welcome again, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you.
In January meeting,
January,
yeah.
yeah.
We'll move on to 11, and I'll hand you over to Colin. Welcome, Colin.
Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I had a small sort of summary there, and I can expand on these in due course. The first one about MPAs, and we're monitoring them from September. Of particular note is Hague Frass, which is our first offshore MPA, and that's actually been monitored using satellite data, and there is a large consultation piece been done regarding this. I'm not sure if you guys have been involved at all, Sangeeta? No? Okay, basically you're talking about sort of 10-minute intervals for reporting, a minimum speed. The actual boundary of it is much more sort of suitable for monitoring. And it's actually an overlay that you have on an electronic chart, and be entering it, will be investigated and prosecuted accordingly should any infringements happen to have occurred. So that's a real massive step forward. You're looking at a 3 nautical mile reporting zone round it before you've actually entered the zone itself. But so it's quite a step forward for us. Yeah. And that will include the Isles of Scilly in due course, and I'll engage with you, Steve, when the time permits regarding that. IVMS, you're probably aware of this sort of stuff. A tendering process is ongoing. Once agreed, the MMO will test devices for approval. I know Devon, Severn, IFCA are very keen to use IVMS for permit conditions, leading on to the fact that permit for crabs, etc., etc.
Yeah, could I just come in there, Chairman? It is built into our permit for the fishing gear permit bylaw that the permit holders should have an IVMS system on board. That has to be agreed by the IFCA meeting in due course. But I did notice today, or yesterday rather, I did get an email from, I think it was from DEFRA, it might have been the MMO, to say that a third device is being tested now. So, I mean, this should have been in place in March, but it was still waiting. But anyway, thought I'd add that.
Yeah, we'll get there. Moving on to the prosecution, dredging company dumping outside an agreed licence zone. 2 out of 8, in fact, is the case that a warning letter and a large number of legal dumps was 30 out of 31. People cannot abrogate their responsibilities regarding this. Looking at it in a conversation with the guys that are doing your pier extension, I don't know if the harbour master has a local law that's Isles of Scilly that allows him to habitually dredge the harbour.
No, we haven't.
No? Right. That's not,
Well, no, but what I'm saying is I don't think because we don't dredge our harbour, we have no bylaw which gives the HR, there's no harbour revision order with that power in its bylaw, in its extent, I don't think.
Okay.
It's something we'd need to check, but I don't think so.
It was dredged once with a permit, I believe.
Yeah, well, is this been mindful of these things, particularly of my discussions this afternoon, which I'll get to in a minute, sorry.
I can answer I can answer that up to a point, because when my daughter was in charge of the mooring contract, we used to get the job of clearing up after the winter, which basically the dredging's done by the ships that are using thrusters and that, and they tend to drag all the rocks into the quay. So what would happen is we'd take every year, where they came from, I've no idea, but we'd take tons of rocks out, but there was never actually any dredging, but because the Salonian's flat bottom, we would remove all the boulders from the inner berth, which was sort of several tons a year. So in other words, there was stuff being moved out.
There was official dredging, and the stuff that was dragged out of the harbour had to go for landfill. And that happened 2 years ago? Yeah. So, Sangeeta.
And just really quickly from memory, I remember that, and this was in Dale's time, because it was Dale, he contacted me when I was the site officer because they needed to do some emergency dredging, so that when they needed to do it, they were getting the appropriate permits in place.
Just summarising it, it was a fine of £60,000, reduced to 40 for an early plea, and the company were to pay all costs totalling £3,500 and a victim surcharge of 120. So in the end, it was about 43.5 grand, and made to be paid within 28 days. So that was very important, particularly because of how long the case took to actually resolve. Anyway, moving on, staff update. David sat behind me. He's now the senior marine officer at Penzance, and that's on temporary promotion for 6 months. And we'll have to wait and see exactly what the plan is for the MMO. I'm currently involved in helping recruit between 12 and 14 marine officers nationwide. The applications across the UK for the 14 English posts number 683 because of a new way of recruiting. I will be interviewing 22 people on the week in about 2 weeks' time, looking to fill those posts. That bolsters our numbers and perhaps better able to support you. So rather than just bringing the 2 of us over, it might be 4, particularly with regards to training the young guys and showing them how diverse, the fishery is here, with regards to the MCZs, the MPAs, the lobster issues, the crayfish issues, the non-bass issues, and that's great. Katie Brown, who you may or may not know, now married, called Katie James. She's returning after about a 6 to 8 month sabbatical with Pizza Express, but she's kind of seen the errors of her ways and is rejoining the force, returning to the dark side. Few fishing bits and pieces off Penzance, kind of Mounts Bay. There's a lot of reports in the press about tuna being seen by sort of sightseers, and that was actually in fact proven to be true. Of note, in the last week, 10 days, have been catching the Atlantic bonito, which is basically like a mackerel on steroids. Apparently it's good eating, and they're quite plentiful throughout the Atlantic. So you may see them here yet.
Yeah, the sapphire saw the bluefin tuna, I think.
Yeah. And we've been catching anchovies, apparently. Cornishmen have been catching anchovies. Yeah, that's confirmed. We went out today and did a routine inspection. Thank you for your time and patience. I know it's nice to know that you can go on board a member of the IFCA committee and be treated kindly and warmly and not float tested.
What I didn't tell you was that I wanted to take you outside where it was a bit roly-poly, but Harry decided that it would be nicer for you inside, so I had to capitulate.
Oh, I did roly-poly after that. We went round to look at your marine licensing site for the not the key widening, the intakes for your desalination plant.
Desal pipe.
So I went around and had a look at that, and I know you've inputted into the marine license.
That got sorted.
Yes, happy.
Yes.
And I supported. When I saw your name on the bottom of the application, I was like, if you said it's good, that's good enough for me. I'll fess up to that in due course. Finally, I've spent an hour with Caroline, who is a consultant for Kier, with regards to your key extension. I would expect you would wake up either Sunday or Monday morning with a better view I'm aware that both barges are being removed in the next 48 to 72 hours. That includes the JCB. I actually went onto the quay extension today. We looked at it from sea. We highlighted the error on the steps. I'm not shy. I might make sure you get a good value for money.
It's not a project.
I know. I know. Trust me.
And we have pointed out the error in the steps a number of times, but they keep telling me it's right. So.
No worries. Spent time with her. They'll be starting to join the two pier pieces together shortly. I am aware of the 5,000 litres of kerosene that kind of miraculously appeared in the harbour. That's something that you're going to have to address outside this meeting. I don't wish to go on record because it's not my official position to state. But what I will say is we agreed and supported the amendments to the licence, the variation with regards to how they're going to go about the quay widening further down towards the Mermaid. And they're going to bring in about 2 weeks' time, the proper machinery to actually put in liquid cement, which will bind in the particulate contaminant that's in the sediment there. And I think that is a much better way of dealing with the issue that was there prior to Keir turning up. And there's quite likely to be issues within that area of beach after they've gone. That's just a fact that it's there. And it's thankful that they've found that it's there. And they're dealing with it in a responsible manner. The subsea bags I wasn't content with regards to not actually folding them in had they not changed the methodology. They're actually going to put in a proper membrane to make sure that's sealed in. So there is, a much reduced opportunity for any particles going back through the 5 mil tolerance of the seawall. I went and inspected what they're doing just now, and I am confident that they are being as environmentally conscious with regards to the fishery and the sensitivities here. The new method will greatly reduce the costs and it will reduce the time by about 6 months. So they should have all the base in place, hardened by November. So that is a huge step forward. And if you have any concerns, Caroline at Keir is happy to see any member of the council or the public, at the Keir offices to allay any fears and to give the facts of what they are. There is one concern where they are outside Sibley's. There is a piece where they've had to open up in the top of the quay to go in to connect the sewage treatment plant that will be fitted in that space, and rightly so. But there is an issue with regards to hydrocarbon leakage, and we can talk about that outside the meeting should you wish. I'm available tomorrow. That concludes my brief.
Thank you for your report. Are there any questions to Colin?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I'm too close on. I'm not sure. I mean, it's not a question on Colin's report, but it's a question to Colin, really. The event in Tresco Channel last week, I don't know if anybody is, there was a barbecue in the middle of Tresco Channel on a sandbar with 300 people in attendance. Was it licensed? Should it have been licensed? Is it an MMO matter? I'm not sure.
Was it below Mean High Water Springs?
Sorry? Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Right. Do you know who ran that barbecue?
Trusco State, I believe. Music, barbecue, transport back and forth.
Not good. No, that's my thoughts. Not good. Does anybody have anything to add to that? No names, no pack drills.
I mean,
I wasn't aware it was on.
No, until until 2 days before, I don't think anybody was. And I mean, I'm not looking to get anybody into trouble on this occasion, but I think they ought to be spoken to about future. To be fair, it's probably just ignorance that they think they own the place, but.
Doug.
I was just going to say tomorrow we could go over to Tresco and you can see him in person, have a presence there, inform him, let him know. Yeah. So clear up, so it doesn't happen in the future.
Right. Yeah. No other questions? Thank you all for coming, and I will close the meeting at 8:02. Thank you very much.